My life is a monument to marijuana.
Well,
If I had a grave, it would go on the headstone.
well, thank goodness we've just about legalized it in this country, or we're getting close. I can't believe it's taken this long.
I'll take out my medical marijuana card and put it in front of the camera. I'm legal.
I'm not worried about
And
it.
I need this for health reasons only.
Okay, I want you to state your name and your date of birth, and then we can get started.
My name is Ed Dowling. I was born on the 2nd of July, 1944, which means I'm going to be 74 on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, I was born in Ellenville, New York, in the
Okay.
Catskill Mountains.
Thank you. So Ed, when did you first arrive in Jerome?
I came to Jerome in the late fall of '69. I came to the Verde Valley to meet up with some friends from a hippie enclave in New Paltz, New York. And they just had a child in a cave in Sycamore Canyon. At the bottom of Sycamore Canyon, they had an old Dodge pickup truck, panel truck. Anyway, they ended up in Cottonwood. I think they got a house from Curtis Linder. And I came and met up with them and immediately started looking for a place to live, and didn't get up to Jerome until this was Dale and Priscilla, Dale and we went up to Jerome in the evening and came into Jerome through the Gulch Road.
Oh boy.
With those old yellow incandescent street lights and the dirt road going up into town. It was like going into a time warp. Wow, this is not Cottonwood, this is not Clarkdale, this is a complete other environment. And that's how, and we went up the Gulch and started visiting most probably the Santillan's. They'd lived there. That was the Sun House and the Moon House, and Boogie Central was in the middle. Those are the three houses. Refugio Santillan, the patriarch of that family, walked to Jerome from Mexico when the mine was happening. And when it basically turned into a ghost town, he acquired almost all of the houses in the Gulch. He had his house, probably Peachtree Farms, and the Sun, Moon, and Boogie Central houses on the other side. Craig Bacharach lives in one. Conlon owned that house for a while. Star and Hannah probably still lives in the top house.
I think
That's
Hannah's
the Sun
still
house.
there. Yes.
Boogie
Star's
Central
down.
is between the Sun and the Moon house.
Okay.
Anyway, came to Jerome and encountered it in the evening, and it was like, whoa. Anyway, later came still looking for places to live, came back to Jerome and found two houses in the Gulch for $1,100. Bought two houses in Jerome for $1,100. Yes.
No kidding.
I came to Jerome with Susan Vokalek, and she had a $500 savings bond that she had her mother send her, and we made a down payment.
And so how old were you when you got here?
I'd gotten out of, this was in 1969, and I was born in 44, so I was after I'd gotten out of the Army. It was probably about 25, I'm going to guess.
Oh, wow. Pretty young?
Pretty young. I had a 26-inch waist.
You're still looking pretty good.
Well, it got to be pretty big, and I've reduced it with very little effort. Anyway, bought these two houses. One had a caved-in roof. The other one had been owned by, or rented by Chopper Ed Kunzweiler, who it was an interesting character in himself. But moving right along, when I came to Jerome, there were three hippie types. Or me and Susan Vokalek, that would make four total. Dick Armstead, who was in Mexican Town, and Jim McCulley, who lived in the Gulch. And that was it. Michael Tash lived in Clarkdale, and Dale and Priscilla lived in Cottonwood, and the rest of the local hippie population were mostly high school kids.
So you were the vanguard of the
Pretty
hippie
much.
Invasion that I
There
hear
was
about.
a previous hippie invasion that was so short-lived and squelched that it's disappeared. There was apparently a almost like a, I don't know, a plague of hippies that hit Jerome. They just kind of went into the old houses. This would be in 67 or 68. Maybe a dozen or two went into some of these old houses without renting them, just moving in. One way or another. Anyway, the county sheriff, they employed the county sheriff and came up and drove these people out of town, and they were here for such a short period of time, no one's really remembered it. But I've been told that story. Huh. Anyway, another part of the vanguard aspect of my showing up was that before I showed up, unbeknownst to me, there was an article in a large hippie publication, the Whole Earth News, or a publication in New York City, that said there's a whole town out in Arizona that's a ghost town, and they're selling houses real cheap. A bunch of us should go out there, get these houses, rent these houses, and make a town that we want the way we want it. Well, 2 or 3 months later, I show up in a van from New York, and had no idea why nobody wanted to talk to me or see me. They thought that I was the leading edge of this takeover of their town, and I was treated very coolly. We eventually found the 2 houses in the Gulch with a for sale sign on them, bought them for $1,100 from Rudy Ulig, who lived he was down in Cottonwood. He's actually from New Jersey. And proceeded to pay off the $600 balance in the next year. And from that point, pretty much watched as the town filled up with more hippie type people. And I've been here pretty much from the beginning and participated in the physical building restoration of this town endlessly.
So that's part of your skill set, carpentry, painting, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. From the roof down, I built half a house in the Gulch. I added on half a house to the one house that we didn't buy at the time. And I started I dug the trenches for the footings and the foundation, and all the way up to the roof. Dave Hall helped me on the roof.
Did you do some of that type of work back in New York before you came here?
Not really, but I've been working with my hands since I was 12 years old, and I can do anything.
Okay.
I can literally do, I upholstered the entire interior of my 33 Ford, but I also rebuilt the transmission in the 33 Ford. I also painted it and did a hand rub lacquer finish on the 33 Ford.
Okay.
I'm a Renaissance person. I'm not a regular cat. I cannot play. There are things I cannot do. I cannot play lead guitar or the violin in a lead mode. That's how I'm wired, but I can fix them and do almost anything else.
So you bought these houses and you moved in with was it your girlfriend?
We were not married.
Okay.
And we got the better of the 2 houses. But from that point on, you're doing work. I had an encounter fairly early on that changed my life in that first house. And it's very comparable to the evolution of hippies in general, which was also, by the way, the Forrest Gump movie had a lot of allegory about the impact of LSD on society. You may not have seen it, but one was the jogging. Just the jogging alone was a direct result of people taking LSD. You may not believe that, but it's true. I did it one night. We're out there in the middle of nowhere, and we just start running like being an animal, like a wild. Wow. Jogging. Anyway.
On LSD.
Yes.
Of course.
Boom. That was implied. He had a beard when he was jogging, didn't he?
Yes.
LSD had an impact upon the society of the world to a degree that may never be really known. It's a phenomenal thing, and it directly influenced my life. That's a separate story if we get to it. It's an amazing story. It changed my life, LSD.
Well, let me just ask one question about that. Had you done it before you got to Jerome?
Yes.
Okay, but we'll get to that story. I'm curious.
Well, it's a very part of the evolution of Jerome is the physical resurrection of the houses, some of the infrastructure. And there's another story of the social evolution of Jerome that I am absolutely also directly involved in, and the evolution as a part of that, the evolution of the arts in Jerome, which again I am directly involved in and helped foster, and these are both directly back to the LSD experience.
Okay.
It's an amazing thing. I was cleaning my house one day, and I found the tin that had the orange sunshine in it, and there was nothing left but some dust. And I licked it just to clean it out. Forgot I'd done it. And what happened to me from that point on changed my life. And I didn't know till the end of the day what it was that I was doing. By the end of the day, I realized that I could live on creative energy. I was delivered a message by LSD that it said to me, you can live on your own creative energy. You don't have to work for anyone. And that message only came to me because I licked out that can. And it changed my life. It told me that I could make a living as a silversmith, as an artist, as a maker of leather belts. It didn't matter. I could do, the day after I ate it, I forgot about it. And during the cleaning up of the house, I spent the day creating objects. And at the end of the day, I looked at them and said, my God, I can sell these. And I did it all with no preconceived thought. I didn't know, I forgot that I'd eaten it. I had no real symptoms of, the walls weren't moving, but that was the thing that changed my life. I'd eaten LSD numerous times in New York and peyote out here. I don't know if anyway, once we hit here, peyote was de rigueur.
Well,
But that thing there, as a result of that, almost immediately, I took my van and painted on the side Creative Persons Guild, and I started the crafts movement in Jerome.
Cool.
And I went to the people that had moved in that year or two's time, and I picked up the weavings from, Bonnie did card weaving. She lived in the Gulch. Kurt Pfeffer was doing the cast brass buckles, so I made the leather belts. Susan was making earrings as fast as she could, and I went around the banana fire farms in the middle of nowhere. They were doing roll beads. There was an instinct to create stuff, and I said, let me take this stuff. I put it in the van, got a business license from Wanda Clough, who I walked into the town of Jerome and said, I want a business license. She said, that'll be $40. I said, okay. And then I parked my van in the street, opened the doors, and sold the stuff.
I was going to ask you where you guys were selling this stuff.
And across from what was then the Candy Kitchen, it's now the Miner's Roost. I don't know what it is. That overlooked vista, I'd park my van in there and open the doors. But I had real stuff. And all the stores had rubber tomahawks.
Right.
And
how many stores
at
were
4
open
or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there would be people clustered around this van, and the shop owners are looking down the street. And they finally called the police.
Oh, no.
And he said, you can't do this. And the county, there was no policeman here. The county sheriff came to me while I was doing it. And I said, I have my business license right here. You know it's going to be false arrest. And he just had to leave. They wouldn't issue me the license the next year. And the town, by that time, the local Chamber of Commerce here knew who we were, saw what I was doing, and and put us on the agenda saying, we're going to vote in favor of letting you have what you do.
Well, let's,
and I forgot to go to the meeting.
Well, let's back up just a little bit before
Anyway,
we get to
that was
stories.
the beginning of the crafts movement.
I'm
and
very
it just
interested in that.
Susan ended up as the president of the whole nonprofit gallery, the gallery on the corner there.
No kidding.
That evolved. I can't
Ed,
remember the name. Yeah.
Slow down for a second.
Oh yeah.
I want to get back to how many people were here when you first got here, do you figure? It's 1969.
And there's a great story there too. There were basically the people who were too old to leave, and the two other hippie people, Jim McCulley and his wife, and Dick Armstead. I'm thinking realistically 300.
That many?
And
I'm
I've
surprised.
yes, there were quite a few houses on the Hogback, on the lower Hogback, upper Hogback, and on up into Jerome that had the people that had lived here. Laura Williams, she was married to them, she was the secretary for UVX. She still lived here. She still had a job and a way to get some income. Pete Yurkovich he used to live here and he became real successful in Phoenix, but he kept his house in Jerome. There's a story for you. The black hats and the white hats. Oh, what a story. Jerome Historical Society. I would say at least about half the houses had someone in them. The English kitchen had its original Hong Song Yi, what's for dessert, apricot pie. There was only apricot pie at the English kitchen because he made those pies with the canned apricots that the ladies picked from these trees.
Oh, no kidding. Well, let's say, today...
And there's an opium den underneath where
that's
you
what I
sit.
heard.
My friend Bob Somerville cleaned it out, and he found a vial of opium and a pipe. And we smoked that opium in that pipe. It's real.
No kidding. You got good and high.
It was old.
It was old. Well, today every storefront is filled, but every space is occupied now. What would you say percentage were there? How many shops were open?
On the main drag?
Yeah, when you
most
first got
on the main street where the Spirit Room on down.
Yeah.
I'm thinking most of those shops had people in them.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm thinking Liberty Gifts may have still been closed then, the one across from the English kitchen.
But they were getting enough traffic through town to keep them open, huh?
When I first came here, things have evolved. For instance, what's now a restaurant across from the post office was the Jerome Fire Department, but before that, it was the Shell station. It was a gas station.
Okay.
So, but it was closed. So that was defunct, but now it's a business that you see, but really then it was just a derelict building. So I'm thinking that most, also the shops further down on the left, some of them were not being used. Right. And some of the shops further down on the right had not been developed or even built yet, like the Orem place wasn't built. But is it the Turquoise Spider that used to be Scotty's Rock Shop was already there. Tourists went through this town, and most of those little businesses were there, but they sold rubber tomahawks. They sold a lot of souvenirs. There was the shop next to Paul and Jerry's, for example, was the Shop Unusual. That was the original shop, the Shop Unusual. And it was closed, yes. Okay. I remember the day they opened it and sold the inventory because somebody had decided to. I'm going to say most of the Main Street shops from the Spirit Room up to the post office were operational, and that was about it. The ones further down from the...
towards the Flatiron?
Towards the Flatiron, that whole section was not, but the House of Joy was, I believe was there, but the shops across the street from them were also not, there was nothing across the street being used either, except Walter lived in one, Walter Powell.
Yeah,
who brought black bamboo to the Verde Valley.
So the old timers had kind of got the place back up on its feet a little bit in terms of commerce and whatnot.
Well,
and
I believe actually, what I saw was the town itself had the structure, and it just basically wore down, and there were children, there were adult children of indigenous people that decided to remain here. The entire Lozano clan, for instance, there was Tony and Anthony and Toni and Balt and Edward. They were all of my generation, and they all stayed and came out of Jerome. and old Tony and his wife were still viable. So what I'm saying is, a lot of the younger, that next generation started to move into the fire department, the town council, and it was like their town. Right. And then a couple hippies started showing up, and
how did they react to you?
It was my things are very personal. Everything from being in Clarkdale, we were run off the road. Literally run off the road and assaulted with a vehicle, but that was down there. Up here, there was simply no cooperation at all. After I bought the 2 houses for $1,100, I contacted UVX to get the lease, to say I want to lease the property like everybody. These houses were on leased land. And Laura Williams refused to give me a lease. She simply refused because I was a hippie. Right. Because she thought that I was a vanguard of people trying to take over her town. Right. Guess what? It happened anyway, and it was just the way things evolved. There was no conscious effort. Anyway, Paul Hamburger showed up at about that time, and he became the manager of the UVX. And once he heard about it, I got the lease in the mail. Okay. And Paul Hamburger had an amazing positive effect on the town of Jerome. He was the administrator of all the UVX. That whole...
so he worked for the mine?
Yes.
One of the... I mean, there was Phelps Dodge and UVX at that time.
And the people who still own the high school, that business entity is still that entity.
Yes, I know.
And I'm there... we were always interested in it because 3/4 of the town of Jerome is one single parcel. It's not owned by UVX, but there's we kept track. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, the inheritors of the UVX, I believe, lived in New York City. We'd gotten to that point, but since we have no control over it, we're just curious.
Yeah.
The entity, which I believe was basically some children who've inherited the stock or whatever it is, they worked. They needed somebody out here to just make sure the buildings didn't fall down and collect the income. I could have purchased the entire Dundee subdivision for $25,000.
Oh my God.
I believe the high school was for sale for $25,000 also. The Dundee is where people went to live who could not afford to pay rent. You could buy a lot out there and put up 2x4s and cardboard. That's where the dump was.
Yes.
When we came here, if you had trash, you took it to the dump, and that's where the Lozanos kept pigs.
Right.
So the pigs would greet you. Whether you wanted it or not, they're waiting to see what you're going to...
Go back to this Wilkinson fellow. You said he changed the town.
Hamburger. Paul Hamburger.
Hamburger. H-A-N-V-E...
H-A-N-D.
Okay.
V-E-R-G-E-R.
Oh, thanks.
Paul Hamburger. And I should know his wife's name because they're like this, and I'm really sorry. I don't have her name on the tip of my tongue, but they're Paul and Hamburger. He was the administrator of all the UVX properties, and he's the one who spearheaded the sale of the actual land under the leased land from UVX. Was eventually sold to anyone who lived and leased that land. And he personally made that happen. He helped me and Scott Owens, not sitting down, but as a group, everyone who leased houses from him, from UVX, had an opportunity to buy as much contiguous land as they wanted at that time, and a one time only. And they had to go to the State Real Estate Commission and get a special dispensation because it was subdivision. So anyway, by the way, the Dundee was a legally platted subdivision from the 20s or 30s. That's why individual lots could be sold, even though they don't conform and all that.
It was a little complicated selling property in Jerome because of the... I guess there wasn't a whole lot of private property. It was all mine owned, wasn't it? The entire town? I mean, in the
beginning? Almost, yes, I would say so.
Yeah.
And this is the third town. The first 2 towns burned down.
Right. that's a fundamental change he made in allowing property to be bought. That kind of opened the gates for you and your ilk to move in and
Well, we
actually
moved in
make a
anyway.
stay. You moved in anyway.
Yep,
Okay,
it's time
well,
to change batteries.
Yeah, gotta hold on. I got the audio still going and this camera's still going. I just want to check.
That's okay.
Check what's going on with this guy. Okay, we're still. Alright. We're good. We can keep going. I'm not going to shut anything off. So, who else that I might know or that came to town in the, let's say, 69, 70, 71? Anybody else I might be familiar with, or even if
Well,
I'm not,
a slight progression of events that'll tie into some of that is shortly after I arrived, probably by the next spring or summer, I'm not sure. Dave Hall had graduated, I think, from ASU. I'm not sure that he'd gotten out of college, and his goal was to end up with a place where he could have a kiln and make pottery. Right? He's been doing so I rented him the other house we bought two houses. We're in the one with the roof, and I let him rent the other one with no roof. We went out to Craig and Pat Bacharach's place way out there, past the Gold King, and got a bunch of scrap tin, and that allowed a roof to be put on the house. But he didn't stay there long, because there were some pretty cute girls that had gotten a place uptown and offered him a place to stay. And he's been up there ever since, one way or another. So Dave Hall was about the first. Now my next encounter with another new resident was that Dick Armstead had lived in Mexican Town, and he lived across the street from where Phil Tovery, I think, still lives. I haven't been here in quite a while. Phil Tovery's place down in Mexican Town. Across the street was Dick Armstead. Dick Armstead had a Volkswagen bus called the Little Walter J. It was in script on the back, just like a yacht. That's a story there, too. Anyway, one day, Jim McCulley's around. I don't know what happened, but we hear there's this guy, and he's in Mexican Town. His name's Peyote Ed. We go visit. And he's in the house where Phil is now. Well, Phil had rented him the house. They're all down in Phoenix on Baseline. Him and Kim Talbot, Bathtub Freddy. So we go visit. And this is Ed Milazzo. And if you're in the Facebook Jerome loop, Ed died here recently. And he was a very significant figure, not only in Jerome, but he started in Enclave in Winslow. And anyway, we walk into this house, and there's this kind of big burly guy with a big beard, and the one entire floor is covered with newspapers and green peyote buttons. When you get peyote, when you're getting peyote, you get them and you buy 1,000 button bags, or 5,000, burlap bags full, and they're green. They've been cut in Texas, and you have to spread them out. That's how they dry. If you leave them in the bag, they're going to rot. So you walk into this room, and there's just peyote. It's paved with peyote, drying out on the floor. That's peyote Ed. Hey, so he was he was another, and he was in Jerome for quite a while, but not a permanent resident. Once he got to a certain point, he went to Winslow and started that enclave.
When you say enclave, what do you mean?
He started literally a small, you can buy land in Winslow for nothing. You can buy 40 acres probably at that time for $400 or something. It was like a joke. There's no water. He bought a bunch of basically what you would consider to be no good land. I think you could see gypsum laying on the ground. It was just, anyway, they started living like indigenous people, like Navajos, built hogans.
Wow.
And they built a number of hogans, and somehow I think they started by hauling water. Eventually they may have actually had a windmill, I don't know, but they attracted other people of the like mind who were looking for a place to live with no rent and were willing to work and build. There were quite a few people, I can't think of her name, There's another people that were in Jerome for quite a while, and they moved up there too. Their place was half dug out. So they were down in the dirt, dug out. And these were habitable structures. Ed's place was a little more open. So his actual house, where the large room, not only where people were eating and sleeping, there were goats and hay, bedding on the other, across the room from it. Anyway, that was Ed Malazzo. He was another one. And then the town just started filling up one person at a time. The Gulch would be a place where people would move because the rent was incredibly cheap. It just almost began to happen like an exponential growth. As like one day you looked around. I lived on the other side of the Gulch. There's the Gulch proper, and then there's the Allen Springs Road. I had the last two houses going out of Jerome on the Allen Springs Road, and I ended up living actually in sold the nice house to Scott Owens for $2,400. Changed his life. He's still there to this day. And moved into the one with the bad roof, and there's a little porch there. And one day I'm looking around, and almost all the places are filling up. Charlie Augie bought the place down below. Jamie Moffett bought the little place further down. The Brewbakers bought that place. People had rented almost all the places, and some of the... anyway, I'd go out on my little porch and go, places, everybody, places, like in the movies, but going, hey, places. That's how direct your question is. It just happened probably within a 2-year period. It went from the three of us, or just before nobody, to at least half of the vacant houses being filled up by people either buying them or renting.
So this is 71, 2, 3?
Yes. Okay. Came in 69. 70 would have been the transition year where there were only like the three of us. But by 71, just literally a year later, people started showing up. It wasn't the Brewbakers. One of the next people that moved in was Rockwell Driver III and his wife, Seal. Rocky. He lived down below me in the Gulch, where the Brewbakers bought later. Rocky and Seal finally went to New Mexico and bought 40 acres over there in the van that Rocky and Bruce Brimhall built, a camper van, Volkswagen camper van. So Rocky was one of the... Rocky moved in, and then Benny and Valerie moved in to the lower Gulch, where Lee Loudon lived for a very long time, and then Jamie Moffett moved into the lower Gulch further on Nellie Bly Lane. By the way, I named all of the previously unnamed streets in Jerome, including Nellie Bly Lane. It got its official name from me and a half a dozen other streets like that.
Kidding.
I did the signing and striping program for the town of Jerome. I also wrote the comprehensive plan for the town of Jerome.
You did? So were you a council member? Or?
I was the town planner. I was hired as a true salary position town planner.
When was that?
It was during a bad time in American economy because it was a publicly funded NACOG position. It was during the big Depression, 76, I'm going to guess. Yeah, 76, 77, because I went to work. 78 for Jerome Instruments. So it was 2 years before that, 76, around there.
Okay. So
anyway,
who did you write the plan with?
I wrote the plan, and that's an evolution of the restoration of Jerome.
This is a good subject to
this
get
is
into.
The plan.
Because this
as the town planner,
the...
the comprehensive plan is a requirement of the planning department, which consists of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the town planner. I was also the zoning administrator and building inspector. Basically, what it comes down to is the town planner gathers the data and writes the text and presents it to the Planning and Zoning Commission at each of the monthly meetings as the document is being produced. And they read it and make changes or say, yeah, this looks good, don't do that. Basically, when it's done, you hand it to them, they read it and say, hey, this is great, let's vote on it.
Okay, what is this comprehensive plan dealing with? What issues? What topics? Why are you doing it? That kind of
If you look in municipal governments, you'll find that virtually all municipal governments have a plan for the future.
And there was nothing at that time.
Oh no, there was nothing in
Yeah.
place at the time. Richard Martin and some other people, by the time the planning and zoning regulation was enacted, there's a reason for its enactment. It's because it was a requirement to get the town on the National Register of Historic Places. The entire town is a registered district, but they wouldn't allow that to happen without known future controls in the form of a zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance was adopted, and that included a zoning administrator. And as a part of this whole package, it required documentation of every structure in town, and Dick Martin and John Tuden and people like that went out and voluntarily took these pictures. And what it ended up with was a commitment as a part of planning and zoning that basically implies that you need to plan for the future. The historic aspect required a plan for the future,
Gotcha.
and those things dovetailed into a comprehensive plan for the town of Jerome.
Gotcha.
Not just the historic overlay, but the entire town of Jerome is the historic overlay.
I understand.
But it was an indigenous thing. It was not a part of any federal program. It just is a function of municipal governments. And basically a comprehensive plan deals with you have to look at the history. You have to, so you'll do a history.
So there's certain requirements.
Well, it just makes sense, and there's a format for a comprehensive plan that just
Okay.
makes sense, which will include a pocket history. How did we get here? Where are we now? What is the condition of the town? And what do we anticipate are the forces that are going to affect the town in the future? And what can we do to anticipate those forces? And so part of that was, we know 3/4 of the town of Jerome is one parcel of land that's privately held. We need a subdivision regulation, quick. And I started writing that regulation before I left. I had a 2-year term. I believe I was hired for 2 years. Anyway, we said, we need a subdivision regulation before it gets divided up for sure. Look at what's happening all around us. We need to plan for what do we need to see in the future, what happens out there, what happens to any infilling here. Most of that was addressed by requirements of the ordinance itself, but one of the main points that was obvious to us in discussion, and we have discussions at planning and zoning meeting, probably some open, inviting people, anybody, the public to show up and add, was that if we're not careful, Jerome will turn into a bedroom community where its own residents will not be able to afford to live. And we need to do what we can. We address that in the plan, but I don't think any plan was made as a result of that. There are line items. We need to address this, and this. That's what the plan is. The plan can't say in 5 years you can't predict the future to that degree.
You mapped that out, but it never
Yes.
became official. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure, because my involvement with Jerome tapered off and basically severed in 2002 when I sold my house. But there was still that. This was in like 78. Right, 76 to 78 was when the plan was written. So by 98, that's 30 years later, 70, 89, 20 years later, there was a need. See, part of it is there's a need to update the plan either annually or every 10 years.
Right.
And I do not know what has happened since that time.
How did you, I'm curious, how did you address that possible problem, the one that you anticipated, becoming a bedroom community where people couldn't afford it? Because I think that's some of the pressure we have on the town today. And I'm wondering, what were your ideas and about preventing that or forestalling it, at least? Gentrification is a pretty powerful force.
I think, as I remember, it was really easy to anticipate and hard to come up with a plan to stop it. if you want to see the nightmare of things without control, and the Sedona is going through hell right now.
Yeah.
It is tearing itself apart, and my spouse is feeling it and and can't help it, and it's a direct result of just uncontrolled growth, absolutely uncontrolled, unmitigated greed, which includes not even allowing the people who work there to have a house. There's virtually no provision for
Right.
people who can't afford it. The next step is the people with decent houses are renting them and moving to Cottonwood because their houses rent for so much money by the day and the week. That one would have been hard to anticipate. But it was already beginning to happen, but it hadn't happened yet. And I don't remember any meetings taking place to actually make plans to try to address these problems. We were happy to just have a document for the first time that was looking down the road and anticipating things to do. When I left this, I was being paid the town by a federal program. It was to get America working again. There was a big depression and the fuel shortage and all that stuff. But what happened is I ended up doing a lot of maps, and John McNerney worked in the Planning and Zoning. He was one of the Planning and Zoning Commission members, and once he saw who I was and what I did, he hired me to do his maps. He was doing geothermal mapping using his new mercury vapor analysis.
That was the business you started down at the high school, right?
Well, it actually started over there on Bell's property, but it went to the high school rapidly. Yes,
right.
We expanded rapidly.
What year did he
that
start
would again about 77, 78.
Okay, and as I understand, I've seen pictures that you probably had 20 employees.
That business is still going.
Oh, no kidding.
Business, that's a very viable business.
And it was a specialty instrument to detect.
It's not only a specialty instrument, it is the instrument of test for NASA.
No kidding.
Everything that goes in the space shuttle has to be certified mercury-free with that device and no other.
That's right, it's mercury.
There's 2 on every nuclear submarine and 1 on every ship in the Navy.
Well, Mr. McNulty must be sitting
Mr.
pretty
McNerney died. Mr. John McNerney died, I believe, within the last year. John was a very special person. He was very intelligent, very far-reaching, and he saw the creative aspect of Jerome, of the workforce in Jerome. As Artisan Craftsman, I was known as a silversmith. I was a silversmith. I'm a good silversmith. I can do anything with these hands, almost. I build instruments to die for, and they sound good too. Anyway, he hired Nell Moffat as a person to help build stuff. Pat Bacharach was also wiring, and then he hired me to help make the chassis. Paul Nonast and I made the chassis. And as soon as that happened, I went, "Excuse me, John, but the way you do this is I draw these, I make engineering drawings of this. We take this to a shop in Phoenix, and they make them for about 1/3 of what you're paying, and they can make the hundreds that you're getting for orders now because they're just going like this." And from that day on, I was his engineer, and I was the chief engineer for that company for a long time, and anyway, that was my life until 1994, was working for the Jerome Instrument Corporation, which ended up on the stock exchange in Phoenix, merged with another company. Stuff going on in that culture. He created a corporate culture that was completely different from others. Our corporate culture accentuated the creative. It took the creative people from this town ended up working there. The Artisan Craftsman ended up building the world's best mercury vapor analyzers, and no one had any trouble making those changes. And it was a very dynamic, very socially interactive group. our production meetings came out of petty cash, came enough money for a quarter ounce that was used after we were done with our weekly production meetings. Once a month, our bigger production meeting included all the beer you could drink plus all the weed, and our quarterly picnics included magic punch. I acquired the nickname Ed the Floating Head, just as a small aside. It was an amazing experience. It was an amazing company. John McNerney created it. It was an exceptional place to work. Barbara Blackburn got hired to continue that. Barbara Blackburn and Greg, I'm not sure, Greg Driver. Yeah. Anyway, this there's all this LGBT thing. I worked for lesbian ladies. Barbara wasn't. She was with Greg. But one of the people I worked with and worked for there were lesbian ladies in there. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter, and none of that was of any consequence. It was a wonderful place to work, and it continued to be for quite a while. When it started after the merger, things got pretty muddy, and a lot of people left. But Jerome Instruments was an exceptional.
Which building were you in down at the when you moved to the high school?
We took over that whole main building, the building that fronts the street. Yeah. Now, I would like this to be known. There's a wooden attachment to the front of that building. If you drive by, you'll see it, and it's got a sign that says "Caution, compressed gases" or something. I had that. I had to get that built. That's where the liquid nitrogen was stored, primarily liquid nitrogen, and other noble gases and stuff like that. We used so much liquid nitrogen that we used these dewars of liquid nitrogen that creates gas, because we couldn't have gas delivered fast enough. Anyway, when that building was approved, that addition, that little ugly wooden structure, it came with a requirement that it had to be removed when we left the building. We left the building and it's still there. It should be torn down.
There's still tanks in there?
No, but all the plumbing is there. It's ugly, and
I'm trying to think of where that is.
And the Arizona Instrument, it's right. Just drive by, you'll see a little wooden shed. Now we made it. The requirement was it had to be compatible with the structure.
Right.
But it's an ugly little wooden shed. It's falling into disrepair, and the Arizona Instrument Corporation is liable for the removal of that structure.
Oh,
you can
boy.
find the documents.
Now, I had a studio in that building for 7 years. I was on the center floor, 102.
Yeah, that
right
was
as you
the
come in
main.
the front door.
That was
Did
the
you
main.
guys have the whole building?
Oh yes, we had the whole building,
No
and
kidding. That's a huge place.
we had a night watchman in the bottom lower end. That was Don, the father of a lady that it'll come to me anyway. There's a night watchman down there, and Dave Rentz finally moved into that position. I'll think of it. Annie. I've been gone for a while. Anyway, she's an artist and has a house up on Company Hill. Artist. Anyway, her.
Rebecca?
No. She's famous in Jerome. Anyway,
yeah,
her dad.
Her father was down there.
Her father was the
you're
watchman, and he was an
talking about,
artist too.
Damn, I can't remember her name.
It'll
either.
come to me when I'm not thinking about it.
Ann Bassett.
Ann Bassett. Don Bassett, her father, was a commercial artist, and he was retired. And he had the night watchman place. We had everything in that building, including the building. We were responsible for maintaining the building. I hired Glenn Stockton. He had a full-time job just trying to keep up with the building.
Oh, wow.
That building was wired with what's known as a reverse neutral. The hot wire was the ground wire. And with the switch the neutral. And that is, you got to know what you're doing when you're working with stuff like that. And he had that, Glenn's, he's now doing a large apartment complex. Anyway, he was the ideal guy for that. It's the roof that drove us crazy.
Very cool. Well, where do you want to go? Want to go to music and the musicians?
Well, I could just
around,
continue
or?
with my. One of your questions was what was the infilling of Jerome?
Yes.
And it just kind of happened over a 1 or 2 year period. There are some aspects. One of the aspects of Jerome's growth or evolution is the building part, and then there is the crafts part. I could just kind of tie that crafts thing up a little better because it was, as I said, I was delivered this message from God or reality as a result of taking a small amount of LSD, which I had completely forgotten about because it wasn't enough to make the walls move or anything, but it definitely did something to me. And as I was cleaning up this of the house, I was cleaning it up because I was in crisis. There was no money, there was no way, there was no work, and as a hippie, I'm going, oh, look at all these possessions. You got to take care of possessions. It was junk that I'd collected. Or anyway, I'd had an old one of these old doors had these different panels, and I had one of those, and I'd found some paint someplace. And anyway, I had a chunk of pipe, and by the end of the day, that chunk of pipe had 3 holes drilled in it, and it became a wind chime, and it was really nice. That panel had become a painting.
Keep going.
I had made 4 or 5 things, and they were saleable. And shortly after that, I made a few more, put them in my truck, went to Sedona, and actually sold a few things. And then shortly after that, I created the Creative Persons Guild, went around to the people that were slowly filling up the places in Jerome, collecting their crafts, selling them on the street. It was very successful. So after they wouldn't give me the license the next year, we went, well, let's just rent a place. So we rented the space across from the House of Joy.
Okay.
We were the first person to take that abandoned space and make a place to sell our stuff. Now, meanwhile, everybody's discovered that you can be a silversmith. This is happening in time. And within a year or so, within 2 years of me selling the stuff on the street and the infilling of Jerome, there were 20 silversmiths in Jerome. When I started, well, within 4 years easily, when I started, anyway, at the time, there's, as I say, Kurt Pfeffer's making these belt buckles. Well, I'm making leather belts as fast as I can, and I see what's going on, and by my own hook, I built my own foundry using a blower from a vacuum cleaner, a coffee can, and asbestos from the lumber yard as the primary insulator, and crucibles from Scotty's Rock Shop, which were all left over from mining. They had assay in them, but that didn't matter because they were just little drips. Simultaneously, Kurt Pfeffer, I'm thinking I'm getting wind of this Indian method of casting, but I had no tufa, but I had pipestone. There was pipestone around, and I carved my first tufa piece in pipestone. It was a work of art in itself, and made a belt buckle out of it on my own hook at home, and sold it to the Peckerich brother that was the dentist. We traded dental work for that. It was the first piece I made on my own. Anyway, Kurt Pfeffer was doing his own casting of brass, and over here, and his foundry was in Mexican Town, and other people. Anyway, he taught me how to solder. He taught me how to silver solder. He was living at the Hart Ranch at the time and doing his casting here. We can stop if you'd like.
No.
But anyway, once he taught me how to make, how to solder, that's all I needed.
You taught yourself all of this metallurgy and how to cast, how to make all this stuff. I mean, you weren't doing that before you moved here.
That's right. But
well,
I'm a smart guy. I work with my hands, and I know what to do. I can do anything.
You'd get books.
I'll tell you that I build guitars.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I build guitars. They're on my website, and I'm turning down offers now. But I build guitars. leading edge acoustic guitars. And when I take that guitar, I will play a composition that I have made. And I'll put it on YouTube. I've got close to 1 million YouTube hits.
Oh,
I can't get arrested in Sedona,
but look you up.
I got people all in South America, Scandinavia, and all over the United States that subscribe to the music that I make. I've done instructional videos, but I can build a house. I can build an entire house. I can build a car. I basically built my '33 Ford. I know every part of an automotive of an engine. I know every part and every function. I've rebuilt manual transmissions, including synchronizer rings, the entire thing. I understand the concept of a hypoid rear end. I'm a highly technical person. I have machines that I have designed at IBM, Xerox, and Motorola.
Well, what'd you do you said you were in the Army, right?
In the Army.
Did you learn these skills in college or in the service?
I'm completely self-educated.
Okay.
I have a high school diploma.
All right.
And I ended up as a contemporary mechanical engineer, which means I drive a CAD system, the 3D, rotate in space, solids modeling. I'm still there. I'm still doing that work. My last project was modeling a $50,000 gallon fiberglass storage tank for finite element analysis by a third party.
You told me you were retired.
Well, that took me. That was about 5-6 billable hours, and I haven't heard from him in a few months. But I still have a state-of-the-art CAD system that I use, and my son's hooked up with 3D printing. Well, I do a lot of he has a product. Well, I design the product. You have to have something to print.
Yes.
And I'm the person.
Does your son live in Sedona?
I take machines. No, he lives in Cottonwood. I take machines that were designed by teams of degreed engineers that don't work, and I make them work. And that is not a joke. I can document it.
Well, I think
I walked into the Motorola facility to take over a project that had been going on for 2 years and had 3 engineers and 4 draftsmen. By the time I got there, they were down to 1 engineer and 2 draftsmen. I got there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and at noon the 2 draftsmen came by going, "Well, what are you doing to it?" I did the whole job by myself in 6 weeks. The complete project in 6 weeks.
That makes me think.
Parts.
That makes me think about the character of a lot of people in town. I'm kind of that way myself. I'm a musician. I'm a painter. I've worked construction. I do computer stuff. There's a lot. It seems that that's the character of many of the people who moved here. That they're
and McNerney knew that too.
They're self-taught and they have a variety of skills and they just make it happen. You sound like you're on the A team, but do you find that to be the character of a lot of the people here?
Yes, and John McNerney saw it right off the bat, and that's why he had no problem hiring creative people.
Yeah, yeah.
And most jobs are. If you say this is the concept, this is what it is, this is what it does, this is what you have to do, you have to attend. If you're attending and paying attention and you're sentient, you got a job. From there, people's aptitudes unfold. Mine's pretty my background was engineering. I did a lot when I got out. I was in the Army as an airborne draftsman. I was in the 18th Airborne Corps.
You drew pictures while you were flying through the air with a parachute?
The 18th Airborne Corps is the headquarters for the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne Divisions.
Okay,
they are the leading strike force
of
the United States.
Yep.
I had a top secret crypto clearance. The entire building was a vault. You can't get in without going past an MP.
And you said you did work for them?
In those buildings, there's what's known as contingency planning.
Okay.
There is a plan for every area and every city in the world. And when one heats up, those plans are updated. What's the water system look like? Where are the generators? There's certain things you can't say because I had a top secret. I had them remove my clearance, and it's a story. It's such a beautiful story. I played the United States Army like a cheap violin.
You sure you want this on tape?
I didn't do anything wrong, but the story, you should just record me telling the story.
Okay.
It's
Go
fantastic.
For it.
Not right now.
All right.
Anyway,
we'll take a break.
I was an airborne draftsman, and this is the place that controls the movements of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Division in and out of Vietnam. That whole thing. The infantry is made up of the people who score lower on the test. They're cannon fodder, and it's really a bad deal. The military. My father was a career soldier, and I lived military all my life until I got out, and it's a tragedy what has happened to the military, and what the military is being asked to do is a travesty, and it started in the Korean War. The Korean War was a travesty, and it's not what it used to be. It's not patriotic anymore.
No.
I was a fool.
Out of control.
They got 2 years. Anyway, I saw action at the Detroit riots. We were the strike force for the Detroit riots because all the 82nd, 101st, the people like were the planners and the draftsmen and stuff. We had M1s because all the M16s are in Vietnam. We had our M1s.
Yeah, from
we
World
got
War II.
on the flying boxcars. When you're flying military, you're flying next to Jeeps, deuce and a halfs, in a noise box with fold down aluminum frames. Anyway, we were the strike force for the Detroit riots. They gave us live ammunition for our guns, for our rifles. You can't say gun. And what's really scary is at no point did I question that they gave me bullets to shoot Americans. At no point did I question that they gave me bullets to shoot Americans. And that didn't even occur to me until about 10 years ago.
Oh my God.
It took me all the stuff about people who get conscripted and what happened in Germany. That's scary. It scares me. That's your paradigm. When you're in the forest, anyway, I stayed at the Sheraton Cadillac Hotel. We took over the Sheraton Cadillac Hotel. It was martial law. We could go out and go to any bar we wanted because we were dressed up. For breakfast, when you're on bivouac, when you're eating mess, you stack arms. You see the stack of the rifles? Right. We stacked arms next to our table in the dining room at the Sheraton Cadillac Hotel. Well, then you put the helmet on top of the bayonet.
Right.
The bayonets weren't on, but stacking arms in the dining room of the Sheraton.
That's a crazy story.
I've had a very interesting life.
Indeed.
And it's been a very good life, and I'm very happy to be who I am. It's not all roses.
That's a blessing.
But anyway, the craft thing.
Back to the crafts.
At some point, before we had Emiliano's, I took my truck, filled it up with stuff, and I drove all the way to Tucson, and I hit the strip there of the head shops and all that. I'd go to places in Phoenix. And the whole indigenous crafts thing was just blooming, and we just kept doing it. Then we had Emiliano's, and that was basically
what's Emiliano's?
Emiliano's was our local. We actually had with a group. The local craftsmen got together and ponied up the money to rent the building.
That was the name of the shop.
Fix up the shop, and then pay the monthly rent. Now, we had a deal. If you worked there so many days a week, you didn't have to pay rent.
Why the name Emiliano's?
Well, Emiliano Zapata, he was a revolutionary.
Okay.
I don't know why we called it. Now I could be wrong. It could have been called something else, and it might have evolved into we're going to have we'll need something else. It may have evolved into Emiliano's after it was taken over, but I don't think so. I think it was for some. By that time, up on top was Grey Wolf. He was a member of our group. I think he got us to call it Emiliano's, but now we could fine tune that.
Okay.
But by that time, there were a lot of people, so it was easy to pull a shift, and there were now so many people, it was easy to pay the rent. But now there's more need for more outlets, and this is over a period 1, 2, 3, 4 years. People now doing Nancy Driver, Greg's sister, was doing real nice leather work, incorporating leather with Pendletons. Pendletons get worn and ragged. Well, you can take sections of them and make handbags with leather inserts, and or vice versa. Now these things, the crafts are getting so good that they're selling in Sedona. Oscar Betts comes along. This is near the end, and he's making production old pawn jewelry, and he's got 4 or 5 people working for him. But Oscar is a story unto himself.
Now, can I stop you for a second? So this is kind of a collective shop. You all chip in for the rent.
Yes.
Are people working there, or just
no? There's
selling?
not. There's not enough room for people to work there. It's simply an outlet at that point.
Okay. Thanks.
And there is such a growth of crafts in Jerome, and their saleability is so much more viable than rubber tomahawks that pretty soon one of the next things that happened is the larger group of craftsmen in Jerome formed a cooperative, and that took over. The Verde Valley Artists, is that what's the thing on the end by the post office? There's a gallery on the end by the post office.
Well, there's Nellie Bly. Then there's
the very end.
Shop.
The very end.
That's a bead shop owned by Mike.
Okay, for a long
by
time.
Dave and what's her name?
And under that are the other shops, the New State Motor Building. That was for a long time a art gallery, a nonprofit art gallery, owned or rented by all of the local Jerome arts and crafts people. It was a true 401c whatever nonprofit corporation. And the real trouble, and we were instrumental in that, it was the transition from Emiliano's or whatever that was to a Main Street venue.
Right. And what year was this, Ed?
Raul Castro was the governor.
Oh, shit.
By that time, I was doing I did an inlaid buckle. That was the state flag of Arizona perfectly. Golden mother of pearl raised 20 or 14 karat gold sun, turquoise sky.
It's got to be in the 80s.
No, I think it was in the 70s.
Okay.
But
yeah, you're probably right.
Anyway, he came up and viewed it was a show that was going to go to the Capitol Rotunda. We put it together. There were such good creative people here that we had a place at the Capitol Rotunda, the Jerome Rata, and Raul Castro came up to view the show. And I watched him walk by my buckle, and he just kind of looked and walked on, and I was kind of disappointed because it was the Arizona state flag. So I left early. And they said, well, you shouldn't have left, because he came back to the buckle and he wanted to meet the guy who made it. But it worked up till our crafts were now being sold on Main Street. And that continued to evolve up to a point where Kurt Pfeffer built his Orem building as a new building further down.
Right.
That as part of the evolution, so to speak.
Who would you say were the people at the top of their game at this
Well,
period?
it's a moving target. If you get into art, James Rome lived here for, I don't know, I've lost track of James.
No, James is here. I'm going to interview him in a couple of weeks.
Good pool player, too. One of the better pool players. Walter Rappaport, right up there, believe it or not. And
I don't believe it.
Walter and
Diane.
The bartender.
George.
Walter and George grew up in the pool
Yes.
halls of New York
I know.
City.
Okay.
And don't play pool with either one of them.
George
anyway,
is my really close friend.
There was Jim Rome. There, it's a moving thing. Artists.
Because Jim Rome's a painter. Was there Dennis? He was also a painter, or did
Diane Gagan, for instance,
Diane's still here.
was into art to the degree that she's got one of the shops moving on down now, and that's the kind of evolution that we're looking at. Really, when I first was here, that was the stock and trade was rubber tomahawks. Literally, that's what we called them. And that's still there. People still want that stuff, but at least there's an alternative. And after a while, you begin. There's also a thing in the crafts world, and it's a real thing. And I experienced it, and that's why I'm not in that world to this degree. Why I had to quit, basically. When I started, I was making $20 an hour in my house. People came to my house and bought everything I made because it was a super unique thing in 1971, 72. By the way, I reinvented how you make rolled beads. People don't roll beads on tufa. It's done by centerless grinding, and I taught myself because I knew about it in industry. I told the Santo Domingo Indians how I did it, and they said, yeah, that's how we do it too. You put all the drilled beads on a piece of welding rod and hold them up against a spinning wheel. You don't rub. There's a block out front of their house where you think they do it. I'm sorry, I got lost.
Well, we were talking about like I'm trying to get an environment of
the
who
art
top
environment
and who was happening, who was
a part of my lack of information is in that in 78 I went back to doing engineering for John McNerney. Okay. I started working full time.
Gotcha.
Around 78 to 80. And before that, from 76 to 78, around there maybe, I was the town planner. I had that full-time job, and then from there so I was really doing it like from 69 to 76, that 6-year period. And after that, I was more on the periphery.
Gotcha.
And my creativity then went into building musical instruments and playing bluegrass.
Okay. Well,
I would like to transition to music because it is a very interesting
take a break
aspect.
here. I could use some water, maybe.
Basically, this will be my little blurb on the Jerome Historical Society, I guess, and it ends with the black hats and the white hats, which is a wonderful story. What I've heard is basically one of the best and largest buildings in Jerome was across from the Spirit Room. It's called the Miller Building. There was a bank in there. In fact, if you go look, you'll still see the tile floor that leads into the bank vault. And the bank vault has been there, I believe it's still there, in the parking lot of the Spirit Room.
Yep.
Well, the bank was in the Miller Building, and it was one of the largest buildings and most significant buildings in Jerome. And like the hotel just down from Paul and Jerry's, was torn down for the value of its materials. Let's forget the hotel by Paul and Jerry's right now, because the other building, the Miller Building, a guy came to town and bid on salvaging the Miller Building. And they went, okay, that means he's going to tear it down and take the good stuff, the flooring, the windows, the doors. And they went, okay, but you have to post a bond because you're going to leave a pile of cement here. You're going to leave, it was a masonry building. It's going to be a mess, and we want to make sure you clean that up. So he said, okay, I'll post a $1,000 bond. They said, okay, deal. This was not the Historical Society. It didn't exist. This was the town of Jerome. Okay. So he wrote a check, and the town clerk took the check and put it in the safe. Okay. The guy takes all the stuff, and I believe he might have whacked the building down. I'm not sure. cancels payment on the check and leaves town. They should have deposited the check. Hello. Now, there's a pile of debris, a giant pile of debris in Main Street, Jerome. No wherewithal. $1,000 is gone. So the people get together to clean it up, and that's the beginning of the Jerome Historical Society.
Oh, really? And when was this?
Before I got here, way before I got here.
Okay.
Now, that little hotel down the street, the one that's all empty with those beautiful arches, that was, I believe, a completely intact building. And they stopped it when Tony Lozano, old Tony Lozano, was still sitting up on those walls, knocking bricks off one at a time. And people went, stop. It was salvaged. First you come in and you take out the floors, you come in, you take out the hardwood windows and doors and the sills, then you take out the fixtures, then you pull the wire, pull all the wire, the copper wire, and leave a hulk. And then the Jerome Historical Society inherits buildings like that and puts them back together. Okay, now the hippies come along and they see this whole Company Hill just declining. And what makes a building live is a person, it's people. And so they go, we'll occupy these buildings and fix them up if you let us live here. This historical society is these are entrenched people, but you can't argue with it. You can't argue with the logic. They said, okay. So they formed a subset, another group. And anyway, there's an entrenched contingent in Jerome. There were new people showing up in Jerome from the other side, the right-wing side, the business side, the hard-edge side. And there were people living here, and there were people who used to live here. And they didn't want any hippies around this town. They certainly didn't want to see them taking over this stuff and that stuff. Anyway, one of the things that happened is some of those people aligned themselves. One of the people that has a house in Jerome didn't like this going on and is rich and lives in Phoenix, named Pete Yurkovich, I believe. And he's a well-known person. He's that big. You'll see him in the Arizona Republic still. I mean, he may have died recently, I'm not sure. Anyway, he helped rally these local people and a bunch of people in Phoenix to join the Jerome Historical Society and get a majority and kick these people out. And he got a bunch of people to join the Jerome Historical Society. And they may have come up on the bus. They may have joined just before the meeting. I'm not sure. But anyway, he made sure that enough of his friends joined the Historical Society to make sure to control the board and any of the ensuing legislation. And either that night or previously, I believe it was the night of the annual meeting where the elections take place, he bussed people in here from Phoenix, a literal busload of people, bought their membership, sat down. Now, I don't know if they all bought it at that time, but they were there, okay? They start the meeting, and right off the bat, the lady goes, as you know, it's time for our annual elections, and the primary requirement for voting in these elections is membership for a year. And all those people just got to get up and leave. And his plan went right. The black hats, they were the black hats.
What was his interest in controlling it? Why
to get
did he
rid
care?
of the hippies from Company Hill.
Well, but did he own property up here? Or?
No, but they were hippies.
Is it just on principle from 100 miles away?
Yeah, well, he has a house. He's from Jerome.
Oh,
He's
okay.
one of the Yurkovich miners,
gotcha. Okay.
Serbo-Croatian, they're Jerry Voynick. Anyway, there were people in town that didn't want the resistance of the status quo to change is phenomenal, and theirs was resistance, endless resistance in many forms, from the existing people that lived here to the evolution of where it is today. This one guy would show up. I'm trying to think of his name. He was a Marini. Mr. Marini would go to the town meetings and just there's an open comments section, and every week, every month, you're just dreading because he's going to stand up and just harangue people, and it's always about these new people. Anyway, the white hats were basically the reasonable people, all the way from Hamburger to Dick Martin, and just the basic. Yeah, well, the town's moving now, but there's this other contingent, and there was some money and some power there, and there's like a little Trump move, and it just went right down the toilet, and everyone was just happy that this whole orchestrated event just fizzled right in front of them. And the rest of the Historical Society is, I visit people in apartments that weren't there because they hadn't been done yet. Now they're done. So moving along to music.
Yeah. Real quick, when did you start playing music?
Around 62. I really want the folk music thing was coming, and I bought a guitar. 62, like 18.
Started on
18,
guitar?
19. Got a cheap guitar, and got a guitar in a pawn shop. But it was a cheap harmony guitar. Too bad it wasn't a beat-up old guitar. No, it was a new harmony. They're the worst guitars in the world. The one with the floating bridge and tailpiece made out of plywood. They're not plywood, by the way. They're solid birch, but man, they're terrible. Anyway, I just kept at it. I ended up with a nice arch-top guitar, a nice K arch-top that had been in Germany and Europe in World War II. And the son of the people that acquired it from the GI came back to America. He was a commercial artist. I was a draftsman in the same area. I got it from him and reattached the neck. So I've been playing the guitar and working on guitars since 1963.
Okay.
I was drafted in 64, and I just kept doing it.
What music were you playing when you started? Who were you listening to?
Well, that was Bob Dylan, man. That whole thing was happening. By the way, the K Guitar Company was making 1,500 guitars a day. 1,500 guitars a day. Harmony was making 1,000 guitars a day. 250,000 guitars a day.
Thanks, Bob.
The K guy went to the board of directors and said, we need to double. You believe me? And they laughed at him, and 10 years later they were out of business, and so was K, because the Japanese market filled that hole. You couldn't build guitars fast enough. 250,000 guitars, 2,500 guitars a day. No, 2,500 guitars a day being built in Chicago. 1,500 from K. The trucks backing up to the front of the building, unloading lumber, and when it's empty, they go around to the end of the building and load it full of guitars. Unbelievable. Anyway, I was caught up in that, and so I had my songbook from Bob Dylan or whatever, and when I was in the Army, I was now playing the archtop, and on and on. I got from the same guy, Franz, a lute. Well, it turned out the lute was such a foreign instrument, it had a different scale. So I ended up making a fretboard for the lute and converting it to an American scale. I did that at the craft shop while I was in the Army. I'm a veteran, 2 years, honorable discharge, veteran of the Detroit riots. Wow. Anyway, I got out of the Army. And in the Army, we were making bell-bottom pants before they were being made commercially, because we were looking at hippies and stuff, And by the way, an Indian from the central of the United States, I don't know what tribe he's from, named Driver, he said, we've been doing that for years. We use red bandanas. So anyway, I made some bell-bottom pants. I was wearing them around New Paltz after I got out of the Army. And this girl just loved these pants. I gave them to her. She gave me a Martin 0017 guitar.
Oh, man.
Because I played the guitar.
Yeah.
And that was my guitar.
Oh, yeah.
While I was in the Army, I went to this folk club. There's an active resistance in the Army, to the Army, by the way, which I was a part of. It was unorganized. Anyway, we went to see this folk singer, Tom Rush. He's doing some great things with the Martin guitar and the stuff on his little fingers. On the break, the place is so small, he's out on the street. I go out on the street and say, what are you doing with that guitar? He says, I'm playing an open E. I've tuned it to an open E. What do you mean? He says, instead of making an E chord, I just wind the 3 strings up and now it's an E chord. I went, wow. I went back to the barracks and put my guitar in open E, and that was in 1965, 66. And it's been in open E ever since.
Oh, no.
I'm a master of open tunings. I've done educational. I've written books, I've got videos on. Anyway, I play extensively in open tunings. From there, I discovered, when I got out of the Army, I discovered the recordings of John Fahey. If you don't know John Fahey, you should, because he's credited with starting the New Age music the New Age music movement single-handedly. The first guy to record a guitar, except for Andres Segovia. I consider him to be absolutely the greatest composer for guitar who ever lived. And when he died, he got 2 pages in the New York Times. You should know about John Fahey.
Oh,
I discovered the recordings of John Fahey. One of his students is named Leo Kottke. He does a song called The Last Steam Engine Train. You listen to Leo Kottke play it, then you listen to John Fahey play it. And when John Fahey gets to the bridge, you're going, oh my God. It's like, anyway,
amazing.
I discovered the recordings of John Fahey. I started playing in open tunings, came to Jerome, Arizona, and just continued to play music by myself for quite a while. There were really no... as the other people came into town, well, a guy named Bob Fry, he played. He did some Chuck Berry stuff. He was the brother of Mary Fry, one of the original resident lesbians.
Yes.
And
Gary Shapiro's friend?
well, that Fern was... Gary lived with Fern.
Right.
But no, Mary was in the Gulch and uptown. But Bob lived in the Gulch. And I'm trying to think of the next... Anyway, at some point, Moses McCormick came to town. This young guy came to town and got this little cheap house from Refugio in the Gulch. And he had a not very good Yamaha guitar. Other people had showed up. A guy named Turk showed up about that time. So musicians started showing up as just people. There was no music movement. And when Moses showed up, he was more serious about it. He had come here from shortly... Moses' story, he was very young. He went to LA to make it with his nice Martin guitar in a case, and he was hitchhiking. He got picked up by some guys who took his guitar and pushed him out the door.
No.
Now he needs a guitar. He ends up in, for some reason, I think it might have been because, anyway, he ended up in Hawaii and he needed a guitar. And he did it because he needed a guitar. He became the bag man in a bank robbery. His job was to go into a restroom, set his bag down, go into the stall, pretend to pee, walk out and pick his bag up, which was now the bag full of money. And take the bag to wherever it was supposed to go. They got caught. Anyway, he ended up in Jerome with the Yamaha guitar. And I remember, at some point, he had to go back to Hawaii to go to court. And we wrote letters. So we all wrote letters saying how he was really a nice guy and he wasn't like this. And so he got off and came back.
Oh, cool.
But he was the basic core of the music growth in Jerome. Basically, because of him and a few other things, we started playing up in the spirit room. He would basically started doing that.
What's
and there
his
was
name again? I'm sorry.
Moses
Uh-huh.
McCormick.
Thank you.
And the half a dozen Facebook people in Jerome, dozens of them will be hooked right up to him. He's on Facebook. And he was a serious musician, songwriter, and singer. And he began to attract whatever was around. And right around that time, so he was here alone, I was here alone. We didn't jam or anything. And right around that time, 3 people showed up. Scott Nesselrode, Nick King, and Lee Downey. And they showed up on a day when Fern was having a party in the Gulch. And Jerome has never been the same since then. I have never been the same.
I interviewed Scotty first as a test, and he told me about that night.
Scott Nesselrode.
Yeah.
Yeah. They started in Phoenix. They got together at the campground by the river that goes across from Scottsdale into Tempe, and there's a park there. I can't remember that park, where your itinerants and everybody stayed. Anyway, they decided to go north, and they went to Banjo Bill Campground in the village in the Oak Creek, and Nesselrode played. Mickey showed him how to do the alt, and Lee played more lead, and Mickey played the banjo. And people heard him play there, and they said, "You should go to Jerome." So they decided to go to Jerome. And once they came to Jerome, they weren't the same, and we weren't the same. And I went to that party.
Explain that a little bit.
I went to that party, and I heard music, real music. I've heard a little bluegrass live, but Mick King was a very special person.
Yeah.
And
All right, refill that for you.
I'm all right.
Continue on. I'll get
anyway,
you some water.
Because it just hit me that's what it was.
I understand.
Anyway, I play in open tunings, and so I use a capo, but I figured out real quick. If I put my capo on the 3rd fret, I'm in G, and that's bluegrass country. And I was able to keep up with those people. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the party and hearing these people play, I'm sure it was 76, it was patriotic. I'm almost positive it was 1976. I went home and got my guitar and sat down next to him and started playing. I could integrate with him, never having played that music before, as long as I knew what the chords were. And anyway, they ended up in and around Jerome, and I ended up, for some reason or other, playing music with Mick and Lee and Nesselrode. And
You guys had a band?
Well, what
With
would
a
happen
name?
is, no, not at that point. Lee kept traveling. Lee didn't really, he'd stay for a while and keep moving. And I'm trying to get the evolution to, anyway, we ended up with the band. Bo Wilson, who's in Sedona, lived in Jerome for a long time. And we ended up with a band called Good Friends, which was Mickey, me, Bo, and a drummer, Chris, and Nesselrode.
And Scotty Nesselrode played what?
Guitar.
Oh, okay.
Rhythm guitar. So there was me and Mickey and Oscar on the fiddle. Oscar had showed up by that time. Me, Mick, Oscar, and Chris, and Nesselrode, and Bo. We didn't. Nesselrode had to go. And once Nesselrode, it was the band with the 6 people, but I believe I've got them all here. Me, Bo, Oscar, Mick, and Chris on drums. We had a newgrass band. We weren't fooling around. We all had pickups. We had an electric bass, a full drum set, and we were doing the newgrass thing. And we were the house band, basically, at the Palace Bar.
Over in Prescott?
Prescott.
Okay.
We played there a lot. Somebody said we were the house band. I don't remember that official designation. But that's a moving target anyway. But anyway, that was called Good Friends. And that band went for quite a while. In the meantime, musicians are crazy.
No.
Musicians are crazy, and Oscar was crazier than most, and part of his skills was being able to piss you off just by being obnoxious and outrageous. Anyway, once in a while we'd get a job and he wouldn't even show up. That's really disappointing. But we had a good thing, and we had such a thing, the three of us. We'd ended up, we boiled down to the three of us, and at that point we were the innocent bystanders. But the good friends thing went until we were playing the place in Sedona. We were playing places. I mean, we're a band. We're getting gigs and playing all over the goddamn place. Not too far from the Verde Valley. From Prescott to Flag. We'd play at a particular thing, and then Valley Dancers would come out next and stuff. Anyway, we're playing, and somebody's asking Bo's girlfriend to dance. And in the middle of the song, he's putting his guitar, he puts the bass down and starts going over and getting this guy's face. Well, what the hell? You're playing in a bar. The girl's pretty. And on Oscar's playing, it just sounded, and I said, okay, this is my last night. And I just quit playing with them. It was getting to be more of a, so I just quit doing it. It wasn't fun. It wasn't rewarding. And that particular night was there was dissonance. So I separated from them and began, I'm trying to think of what the hell happened with me next. What happened was I was probably just floating around, getting into recording at some place I was desperate for. I was really desperate for a cassette, just to have a cassette recorder. I finally manifested the little cassette recorder, and things were moving along, and that was basically phase one. Anyway, that band died. Mick, Oscar, and me kept at it. Lee would keep coming in and out, and another guy named Don Joseph came to town. Donald Joseph was a professional singer-songwriter who had inherited or was due to inherit a minor hardware empire in the Midwest, and he blew that off, got a Martin guitar, and came out here. He's a very serious songwriter. He wrote a song called Jenny Matilda, which you will still hear in Aspen. It's a standard up there. I can't tell you any hits he's written, but very good musician, good entertainer. He came to town. A nexus of that was now we had Moses, we had Mick, Oscar, and me, and I'm the minor creative person in these bags. And who was I just talking about?
The songwriter guy.
Don Joseph.
Yeah.
And so there's like a musical consciousness in Jerome at that point. It wasn't all that focused. We're getting work as the innocent bystanders, and Don is serious. Now, if Oscar, and for a while, Mick and Oscar went to Santa Fe, and I'm alone again and floating around. They come and go. They came back. Lee would come and go. Oscar's living in Santa Fe. Mickey can't take it anymore. He's back. Me and Mickey get together. And this keeps going on. Now Lee will come to town. Now Lee and Mick and me will play in the Spirit Room. There's Mick and I are on either side, and we change the man in the middle. Sometimes Don Joseph is in the middle. He knows our stuff. We're playing. We know his stuff. There's a song called Jealous. She's so jealous of the other woman on our night. That song is a hit, and I want to record it and document it. I got a bad recording of it someplace. They written it with a guy named Gordon DeWitty in L.A. When I go out to get the evening paper, I come back home. She's interrogating the neighbors. She's so jealous. It's a reggae type song. It's a wonderful song. He's a great songwriter. Anyway, Moses finally leaves. Oscar's in Santa Fe. Mickey's in and out, and then John Ziegler shows up, and Tony Bruno shows up, and this is just relative. This is where I start departing a little bit, but I want it known that I was hanging with John and Tony in the beginning, and I'm playing open tuning and slide guitar, and Tony Bruno's the best slide guitar player in the world.
Yeah.
And those guys had been playing together for a month or two. They had some stuff going on. So I kind of started to withdraw. John would come down. We were jamming. Pat Jacobson would come down. And John, with John Ziegler, he'd go, here, Pat, you play this. Ed, you play this. And pretty soon we're doing viable music. But anyway, that he stayed. He ended up with Tony and Teddy Rocha and Dave. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, that became the major lingo thing.
Dave Rentz, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
that became the major lingo thing. But there were other ones. Ambush with Teddy. There was Teddy. I have recordings of Ambush. I made a CD and gave it to John. Teddy and John, and probably Dave, had a band called Ambush first. And then they became major lingo.
Okay.
Sally, I think, was the difference. Sally, Teddy worked at Jerome Instruments. He wasn't full time. And they said, Teddy's out, Sally's in. And Teddy was like, oh man, he wasn't happy that he was doing good stuff. It was a good cohesive band. That might have been the change from Ambush to Major Lingo.
Okay.
Anyway, at that point, Mick and I, he left and finally came back, and we still played. And I have recordings of us playing in the Spirit Room after he came back. And I forget what name that is. Anyway, I have a 2 CD recording of us in the Spirit Room on a typical day, recorded by Walter Rappaport, who was a professional soundman.
Yes.
And we got him. I paid him $50 to record us. I think it boiled down. He was recording a 4-track. I gave him my 4-track, and he had this big snake, and he's way back in the room, and it's all boiling down. To a 4-track. And I was able to still manipulate those tracks and boil it down, and I've made a 2 CD thing. So that's enough of the music thing.
And that was that recording was of you and Mick together.
It was the True Innocent Bystanders, Mick, Oscar, and me, and
okay.
Craig McLean on
bass?
stand-up bass. I'll tell you, Craig McLean was managing the Spirit Room at that time, and we played every Saturday and Sunday afternoon for a decade. Boom. And sometimes it wouldn't always be Oscar. Sometimes it would be Lee in the middle. Sometimes it would be Don Josephs in the middle. But Mickey and I were there. And we played that music. And once in a while, you'll get bikers. And it's not pleasant. It wasn't pleasant from time to time. But I spent many, many hours up on that stage.
Cool. And then, so what happened? So you played with Mick up until you moved away?
And then he came back, and I played with him until he died.
Yeah.
In the end...
That was a big deal for a lot of people here in town, if I remember.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
At the time, it's a trajectory. It hits me more now than it did then. I was a major part of his service, orchestrating his service at the lower park where the picnic stuff is. We had our service there. So I'm busy doing all that stuff, and his trajectory was over months, 6 months probably at least. So it wasn't that devastating at the time. But I can't listen to the music anymore.
Oh, bummer.
I can, but it does this.
Right.
He's a very special person.
Yeah.
Here's an example.
Yeah.
Imagine
about him.
You're in a kind of a second-class subdivision somewhere in Tennessee where the streets are still, there's pavement, and there's a 12-year-old kid riding down the street, no hands, playing the 5-string banjo. That happened.
Do you mind?
I have a lot of other stories.
Do you mind telling me a couple of stories that demonstrates his character and why
Eddie?
It's affecting you strongly?
Eddie, lend me $2 to get a pack of cigarettes. I don't have 2 nickels to rub together to get a pack. Lend me $2. I don't have 2 nickels to rub together to get a pack of cigarettes. That's what killed him. Mickey, I'm not going to give you $5. I'm not gonna lend you $5. I'm gonna give you $2 because you're not gonna get the money back. But
Right.
and that's what killed him. He was born off the back of a motorcycle. His mother stopped long enough to have him, gave him to her mother, and went on down the road.
Oh boy.
He wasn't not fully developed, and as soon as he gave her the grandmother any trouble, she threw his ass in the detention, juvenile detention. So he grew up hard, but his spirit was indomitable. And that's the thing. It's the spirit, and he had it. His sense of timing was the best.
Musically, you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. The tightest banjo you'll ever hear. Absolutely, the tightest. Doesn't matter who it is. It's tighter than Earl Scruggs. Literally. If you're singing 4-part harmony, he can tell you all 4 parts. You sing this, you sing this, you sing this, you sing this. Genius. But as a person, amazing person. We got to get to some other stuff.
All right, buddy. That's okay. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, you were going to, maybe this will change your mood. You were going to talk about peyote.
Yeah, so.
You want a minute? You want to stop?
Oh, no. Like I said, when I came here, one of the first people to show up after us was Ed Milazzo, known as Peyote Ed. And there was a peyote consciousness, too. That's where I first encountered it. But there's a person, pivotal person in the Verde Valley who I'm going to refer to as Mr. C, because we know him. He's still politically active and a nice person. And I don't want to... Anyway, my friend, the people I came to see, the people that had a child in Sycamore Canyon, got aligned with peyote as soon as possible, because for him it was also a way to make some money, I'm sure. But just the idea of peyote, what it is, the Don Juan books hit. And the very first Don Juan book his experience was the peyote experience.
I got 3 of them on my book.
I have the whole set. One of my projects is to take them apart and put them together chronologically, because he broke them into different... anyway, that's there. The peyote's there. By this time, I'm living in the house that Scott's living in. And by the way, the architecture of that house was originally, I call that style early Greed. It was built in a hurry. It had a lot of little rooms. Well, somebody had gone in there and taken out the partitions in the ceiling. It was this beautiful open old wood cathedral ceiling, beautiful house inside. What we left was, I finished that up and left the cross beams that kind of tied the walls together so the house didn't come apart. Anyway, my friend Dale, who's no longer here, he's in Canada, aligned himself with a source of peyote. And in this area, it was the Boone brothers. The Boone brothers are Navajos that live on the reservation. And so he got hooked up with the Boone brothers, and they came to visit one day to my house in Jerome. Sam Boone. And the whole Indian culture is just another thing. You go to the reses, 2 upside down cars, Shasta cola cans. The Indians are not who you want them to be in many ways. So anyway, and there's the government house and the Hogan. But they're familiar with the government house now. Some people live in the government house and the Hogan's for storage. Anyways, Sam comes to my house and I'm showing, and he looks around, he goes, pretty nice. Needs sheetrock. I thought that was so. He thought that it's just such a reversal of everything. Needs sheetrock. Anyway, peyote was the thing, and peyote it's like a spirit. It's its own thing. There are dried buttons and there are green buttons, and there's this myth of the hair. You can remove the hair if you want. If it's going to have bad strychnine in it, you'd think that if you taste the hair, it would be bitter and everything. I think you'll find that it has no taste. I don't care. It's a ceremony. You take the hair out. The dried button, by the way, the buttons they're various sizes. When they dry, a button this big will dry down to about the size of a quarter or so, and they form a tulip-like thing, and you pull the hair out and then you scrape it, and it makes this beautiful little yellow core to this flower-like thing, and then you break it apart and put it in your mouth, let it soften up, and eat it. There's all these things. If I was to sit down right now and eat 3 medium-sized peyote buttons in about another 45 minutes, I'm not going to feel so good. But if you eat peyote on a regular basis, that goes away. And if you've eaten some peyote or drinking some peyote tea and you're up there now, you're not necessarily really hallucinating your ass off or anything, you're feeling this stuff and you've gone through the part, that initial drowsiness and stuff. You can eat another button without eating the orange. You can drink some of that tea without needing to rinse your mouth out. It's another dimension that you hit. It's like getting your wind as it's not that bad. It's not that bad to eat a green button. But if I was to eat one right now, I'd want an orange or something to break the taste. I would. But after a while, you could eat a peyote button like a corn chip. And John Ziegler will attest to that because he's seen me do it. He's joked about it. Anyway, one way or another, the psychedelic experience, an LSD experience, mushrooms, or peyote has so much to offer. It's a life-changing, truly expanding and spiritual experience, but you got to know what you're doing and you can't use it to escape. Anyway, if you take peyote, if you eat peyote, you're going to have an experience. But just as an aside, in our lives, we have problems. And the people who use peyote in a regular way it's called the peyote way, like a path. And in the process of living my life day to day, month to month, having to provide for people and dealing with people and all this shit going down, you might have a problem. You might have a real problem, like I can't pay the rent, or what am I going to do? My car's broken, or these people are, you eat peyote, and you eat like 3 or 4 or 5 buttons, and you have that experience. In the morning, when the sun comes up, you'll know the answer to your problem. You will know the answer to your problem. Now, people aren't saying this, but it's true. And it happens virtually every time. Now, if you eat it and you don't have a problem, in the morning you might realize that you did, and it might be telling you that you need to be doing something. This is the psychedelic experience. This is not what you think. This is not the walls dissolving and hallucinating UFOs and God giving you messages. The true nature of peyote and the psychedelic experience in general is that. With LSD, it's comparable to having driven your car across the United States and this stuff, you don't realize it, and then you put on the windshield washers. And taking LSD is similar to that. It's like, whoa, the windshield got clean and I'm seeing stuff that I wasn't seeing. For instance, you walk by a sink of dirty dishes for 3 days, and when you're on acid and you walk by it, you can't stand it, you're going to wash those dishes. That's the psychedelic experience. It's a learning experience. An experience in itself is growth. That's what it is. Learning is experience. Theoretical learning and academic learning has its place, but experiential learning is what drives the world, and it's important. Anyway,
you feel like so you obviously got information or insights as a result. You say that came from deep within you, a sort of archetypal Jungian kind of thing, or connection, spiritual connection with the universe?
We could sit here and I could do a dissertation on the psychedelic experience, the nature of the experience. It would be very valuable for anyone who wanted to listen to it. it's cohesive, but it's too long to discuss. Basically, we have a duality. We have a conversation with ourselves. There's two of us. One is fear and one is longing. What comes to us comes through our paradigm. Everyone has a paradigm. It exists from our view of the world evolves as our experience from what we see and what we're told, and what we're told is the world in the form of bad history of America in school, all that stuff. Everyone evolves. Go down south, look at that paradigm, and everyone has a paradigm, and that paradigm consists of basically you have longing and you have fear. Fear is the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper remembers those experiences. Don't touch that stove. You remember how you got burnt. Don't touch that girl. Remember how you got your heart broken. Pretty soon, these are the filters. These are your paradigms. And they're created mostly by this thing trying to protect you. And it filters out what it thinks you don't want or see. Now, you take one of these drugs and it vanquishes, it opens up your windshield, and things come to you that your own being is filtering that you have no idea until it's not there. And when the gatekeeper is vanquished, things will occur to you, and you will see things about life and your own life that are meaningful and significant and of great help. LSD and psychedelics are the greatest single tool for mental illness and emotional development that ever existed. Hello, like marijuana is to opioids, it has that place. Anyway, the psychedelic experience with peyote, this is funny to me, it's funny. If you go to I have never gone to one, but the peyote ceremony is very regimented, and the guide, the person who's in charge of that trip, is the road chief. This is a humorous thing. Well, I found humorous, and there's the guy who tends the fire. He's the fire chief. And I know he's the fire chief. And the two images are kind of funny. Anyway, a guy went to a couple, one or two, to deal with alcoholism. But basically, here's a scenario. Well, the peyote experience, I've had it many times, not many times, like 50 times. You eat the peyote. If you haven't eaten in a while and you eat too much to begin with, you're going to feel an upset stomach and get drowsy. And if you're really screwed up and eaten and stuff, you might throw up. But after the drowsiness and things settle down, you wake up, and it's another way of experiencing the world. You can keep eating. If you play music, the music is going to sound different. Even if you're playing it yourself, the musical sound of the strings may even be different colors. But what you're doing during the whole experience is you're simply experiencing reality in a way that you don't normally do. You've turned the volume up on reality itself. If you're driving down the road, you're feeling the bumps more. You're hearing the ticking of the valves in the motor that you've forgotten even existed. You're opened up to experiences, and you get information. Yes, you get information that's always there. It's not secret information, but your own paradigm has kind of filtered it out.
Right.
What I found was that from time to time, after you've had this experience, you'll know when there's a need to have it again. Part of this, which I had great hope for, is that, to me, shared social experiences are church-like. The spirit room is a church. A bar is a church. And it's a more primitive church, and there's a reason why the neon lights are red, is because it's a fire. Just like people gathered around a fire. Church is a church. And I was really hoping that for our community that peyote would become the replacement to the bar. And there were movements we had numerous attempts at having social eating of peyote. We had 2 that I know of. There were probably more. Oh, and we had successful ones. We had,
How would you characterize a successful?
for a number of times, we would, us and some other people like us, Dale, and maybe some other people from Jerome. We had some friends. My brother came out once, and it was obvious time. You go out to the Red Rocks, you go out to the middle of nowhere, you can see the Red Rocks. At the time, you didn't have to pay anybody anything. You find a nice place. It's in the late afternoon. You find a nice place. You build the fire ring, and the sun goes down. You got your firewood. You build the fire, and you start eating peyote. You sit around the fire. It's now dark. Somebody's going to have a guitar. I'll have a guitar. You'll play the guitar for a while. This is a particular one that we went to out there. Some friends, my brother was visiting. Some people from Florida, for some reason, had showed up here, and the lady was pregnant and having some difficulty. Vince, who was a local person here, myself and another person all went out to the middle of nowhere. We ate the peyote and sat around. The people from Florida had a problem, and they needed guidance of a certain type, and I don't remember what it was. The fire's going. We've eaten peyote, and we've gone through the initial thing. We're sitting back up. There's talk, and I'm playing the guitar. The fire's going, and this goes on for an hour maybe, and now we're really kind of peaking. And the fire has died down. Now it's only embers. And now we all lean back. Now we're laying on the ground, and all we're seeing is stars, because the fire is not doing its thing. And nobody says anything for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then we all sit back up and go, wow, did that just happen? Now everybody, but we were all doing it together, didn't even realize it until we were done. Boom. But everyone had an experience. If I had a problem, that's what I was dealing with. Sooner or later, maybe not when I'm looking back, I am in the cosmos, man. And we were all in the cosmos, and people swore that the people from Florida had a resultant experience from that. And I don't remember what it was, but none of this deals in bullshit magic. There is no vortex. We're not experiencing vortex. We've simply gotten rid of things that build up in our own beings over life that prevent us from having experiences of this type. Anyway, that's a typical peyote experience. Another experience, like I'd eat peyote with somebody and just start walking up the Allen Springs Road on a moonlight night. Talk about, if you see those rock outcroppings, they become entities. But you realize you're getting input whether you want it or not. You're getting an experience whether you want it or not. And you can tell yourself that they're just rocks, but you got that emotional connection when you saw that image in that rock.
So how many people you figure it was a big deal in Jerome at that time? A lot of people partaking?
We had one by that time, Scott had the main house, the bigger house, and I had the small house, and I was promoting this. And I went, I'm hoping that we could start an alternative to the bar as another way of having social bonding. And so we call for a meeting. We said, we're going to eat peyote down at Scott's house, and people show up, and some people bring food. Well, that's not going to work. And some people are eating they're eating the peyote, and some people aren't eating so much peyote. And then there's like a flurry of activity. People have eaten the peyote, and now there's some drumming, and people are playing the guitars. And we start at maybe 7 or 8 o'clock, and like about 11, people are going, oh, well, I think I got to go home now, or I think I want to go up to the bar and see what's going on. And there was like a core group still left there, and the rest of the people just thought it was kind of a theme of a party or something. And they left, and so that just didn't take, so to speak. It's too rigorous. Peyote is too rigorous to deal with casually, and to not know what you're doing. You really need to know that it will allow you to see things that you're not allowing yourself to see.
Right.
For instance, this happens with acid. People take acid and have a bad trip. They were on a bad trip. They just found out about it. Here's another one we did, and this one is a much more of a reason to. At one point, they made a federal law outlawing peyote, the use of peyote or the transportation of peyote, I believe, including the church or for anyone but a direct member of the church. I don't remember. It was a severe limitation of people who were then allowed to have it and transport it. And there's a person who fades in and out of the peyote scene in the Verde Valley named Roy. I believe Roy is Canadian and at least half Indian, Native American, North American Indian. And he's associated with either peyote or psychedelics. He's a very nice, cohesive, unthreatening, centered person. Anyway, he has this consciousness, and he comes to me because I'm kind of a local consciousness bearer, but not of his caliber, and says, well, they got this law, and this law is not good. We need to have a meeting to deal with this law. And we had a meeting. This starts to sound real. All right. So we're going to have a meeting up the Allen Springs Road at the Columbia Spring, at the Columbia Mine. That's the first turn of the road. It's a long walk. So at the time, you could still drive it. We mostly drove up there. And we had a 100-button tee. And we had quite a few people because, again, the social aspect, we're going around talking it up, saying we're going to have a meeting up here. The purpose of this meeting is to deal with this law. Wow, you can have a meeting and deal. All right. We got like 25 people. And what's interesting, as an aside, is to some degree, that party thing still was with some people. They brought it with them. Anyway, we make a 100-button tea. That means you take the buttons green or dry, you put them in a large pan and boil them. And we put 100 buttons in that pan. And when you're done, there's no liquid in that pan. So the 25 of us, or 20 of us, had a 100-button tea. So you built the fire, you're boiling the tea, it's now dark, and you're drinking the tea because it's now if you drink it all, you can put some more water in there. So you're drinking the tea. Inevitably, now somebody's got a drum. There's the guitar. I'm playing the guitar. And the music you play isn't going to be, you're not going to play bluegrass. You're not going to play a particular rock and roll hit. The stuff is going to tell you what to play. And it's going to probably be strumming and chords. And you're going to hear so much coming out of that guitar. You don't have to impress anybody, you just have to do. Anyway, playing the guitar for a while, and there was quite a few more people. So one of the things that happens is people will splinter off. People are high. If the moon is out, you'll go for a walk up the road. We're in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. You can take a walk. You can commune with Mescalito by yourself. You can be social. You can meet people. Joel, a friend of ours, was Visiting. He started getting hooked up with a girl, and they go, yeah, what is it? And part of that is an illusion too. Who knows? But eventually, the people who aren't really getting it kind of go, well, I got to go to town. So some people peel off, and they end up probably still going to the spirit room and be able to talk about that they went to a pain. It's like, hello, you didn't get it. But anyway, we're left with the people who are there to do the thing. We're there all night. we didn't have the same experience, but inevitably the fire does go out, and this one place where we are, you can see the peaks. It's like this thing that opens up like that, and they're right there. After the sun in the morning, what we had there was the cloud pattern. So it was during monsoons, and the cloud patterns that were evolving that morning were definitely something to look at. Anyway, you break your fast traditionally with corn, and we ate the corn. That's what we had for breakfast. Roy brought the corn. He made sure to bring corn. He's a real thing. And then everybody goes home, and the rest of the day is interesting because you're still high, and you're very peaceful, and eventually you'll go to sleep. And the end of the story is, within less than a year, they got rid of the law.
No kidding.
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
So that's peyote. And that's my thing is marijuana. I have a card for marijuana. And we are going to find, for instance, I had my prostate removed. And it's a year and a half later, I have no signs of it at all.
Right on.
Nothing.
Good. Yeah.
I've been medicating myself all my life.
Well, let's...
And even that stuff, that mid-grade Mexican shit, you were getting CBDs.
That's right. I've got some oil on my shelf up there.
We were getting CBDs all the time, whether we knew it or not.
Whether you knew it or not. Well, I want to ask you about what's Jerome mean to you? I mean, what did it mean to your life?
Jerome is my life. If I'm writing my biography, my intent is, basically my biography is my life in Jerome. It's continued, and I had one before, but the majority of my life is my life in Jerome. And if I were to, I'm intending to write a book. I've started a number of times, but the book starts when I hit Jerome. It doesn't start any earlier than that. Sedona is a casualty. Sedona is a lost cause. Sedona is a travesty. The very people who live there are now living in hell. To a degree, we found a place in Cottonwood. We got a nice place in Sedona. If there was a way to push that button, we would have bought the place in Cottonwood. The business people have taken over Sedona to a point where they're running the town. They're the town council.
Right. Well,
and you can't live it's so crowded, you can't live there. And they want to put in, they're putting in parking meters. It's a complete travesty. I used to go into the middle of nowhere.
Sedona. Let's get back to Jerome.
Jerome, the residential aspect of Jerome, as I see it and have watched it evolve, continues to be good, approaching ideal. And the use of the National Historic Site, the designation, the zoning ordinance that requires compatibility is working, and it needs to keep working and probably be accentuated as opposed to being de-accentuated. Fortunately, the business area is contained. It is carnival-like, and it is at its limit. It's somewhat disappointing, and I think everyone should consider reducing the carnival-like atmosphere and replacing it with higher quality goods, and everyone will make more money. There's the contingent that wants to buy the rubber tomahawk, that is distracted by shite, briny objects, and they're the ones you need for the carnival atmosphere to get their attention. But as a resident, I lived up in the highest house in town, which Louise has. It's not the Eagle's Nest.
Okay.
The one with the big trees that are... Anyway, on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, I'm listening to the Spirit Room and Paul and Jerry's with dueling bands and the doors open. And it needs to be dealt with. There were many times when I've called up during the weeknight and say, close the door, you're breaking the law.
Yeah.
And they have to. The impact of business on the community, let's remember, I'm getting this consciousness, the community belongs to the citizens, it does not belong to the businessman. And the citizens need to remember that and exercise that. You have the ability to control some of the undesirable effects of too much business. Architecturally, things look like they're working pretty well. Liberalization in many ways is okay with me. Requiring outmoded building materials and faulty windows is not going to help anybody, and that's all being taken care of. The next big challenge for Jerome, the current challenge is what happens in infilling. I'm watching that. I've seen there's 6 or 8 houses been built since I left in 2002.
Yeah.
I built a new one myself. The Dundee is red, it's so control of maintaining some control over new houses as a buffer to the existing historic overlay makes a lot of sense. That's existing. And the next big one is please have your subdivision regulations in place right now. If you don't, get them next week. Put subdivision regulations in place because it can happen tomorrow. All they got to do is push the button. And say,
regulating what? To keep business out or?
Everything. Lot size. Lot size right off the bat. The way that roads are constructed, you have to say, these roads must conform to the curvature of the land. You cannot change the land. These laws are in place. There are many places where they already have taken into consideration, it's called cut and fill. You have to directly limit cut and fill. You can't say, you've got to go in and word the ordinance such that you cannot end up with grids and cookie cutter houses.
Change the terrain.
Yes, for right off the bat, it's all owned by, I believe, Sella and Mangini own that chunk of land.
Which one?
Look at a town of Jerome map. All the land that isn't it goes up the Allen Springs Road. It takes in Mescal Gulch. Everything where there's not a house, the existing town of Jerome is this big. The contiguous, let me put it this way. Now I have to look. The boundaries of the town of Jerome are like this. Where there's one single parcel owned by one person. This is the town of Jerome before its limits were expanded. This is the town of Jerome now, and all of this land is unbuildable, is not being built on. It's already, 3/4 of the town of Jerome is one contiguous parcel that is yet to be built on. It takes in everything. It goes all the way up the Allen Springs Road. Mm-hmm. Everything from that road and the road that goes out from there all the way back to the Dundee. It's bigger than the town of Jerome. It's 3 times bigger than the existing footprint of Jerome, but it's in the town boundaries.
Oh, okay. I get it.
It's in the town boundaries. They extended the boundaries to take in this because it's privately held land. It was easily defined. Okay. And it's all owned by one corporation that can push a button and say, let's subdivide it. And if there are no rules in place, watch out. What you have to do there is then go to have some kind of an embargo. So put the rules in place. I started them when I left. Okay. I got the plan wrote and approved and all this other stuff. And then I started writing the subdivision regulations. The way you write regulations is you find a similar community and you copy theirs.
Right.
But our community is so unique in this case that you're going to have to find a real unique community to base it on.
Yeah.
And the manipulation of the land itself and the size of the lots are the two critical things. Make the lots as big as possible, make the land as original as possible. The pipeline is just right up the road, so they got all the water. They got all the water they need for that to service that whole piece of land. The pipe crosses the road on their property, right? So they've got all the water they need.
The one that feeds the town?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So all they need is a place to put poop, and they can basically subdivide it. And and again, the tendency will be large lots, scenic, it's going to go for rich people, and then that's further changes the balance in Jerome. So then you need a land use policy that says any certain development needs a certain amount of low income housing, things like that.
Right. We already have that
social engineering. It's a shame that people have to use social engineering, but it's a reality. Let me tell you what, side yards and backyards, those requirements are there. And when you've got your next door neighbor putting up tents in his side yard to rent to people with children, and they're describing the size of the excrement piles the children are leaving in the yard, you realize that you need yards. That it's not simply a superfluous thing for aesthetics. Right. You need... Planning and zoning has a purpose.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've gone for about 3.5 hours now. And I'd like you to just maybe, I don't know, what do I want you to tell me about? I think like, I was trying to we got off tangent a little bit, off track. Just about your feelings about Jerome and the people that lived here and, how it's impacted your life and why it's important to keep it.
Well, since
it
evolves, things evolve. History is a moving target.
Well, yeah.
Restoration is a moving target. You can't pick.
Well, I'll tell you this. Let me stop you there.
Climate is a moving target.
Imagine you're talking to Jeromans who live here 50 years from now.
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
Well, I still have my same commentary. It's an evolution. The Jerome social structure is an evolution. Let's say it started with a cluster of the people who were left over and some interlopers. And pretty soon the people found out, for instance, Tony Lozano, I had a goat that I let roam. He had a brand new Chevy Malibu, and my goat walked on the top of his brand new car. And he came to me and he wasn't happy. And I said, I'm very sorry. I'll tie up the goat and I'll pay you for the damage to your car. And it set up a relationship. When I knocked on his door and gave him another $20, after 2 or 3 months of giving him his money, he saw that I was a real person. And then we were okay. And so this new group began to interact with the older people, and they started, it evolved over a 5 or 10 year period. The people that were feared slowly became the people that ran the town, and I watched all that happen on that level. The social level, again, very similar. In the beginning, we would go up to the spirit room, but most of the people would either be from Cottonwood or drinkers, or people who had stayed over later as tourists. But pretty soon, one night, after having gone to the spirit room over a period of, let's say, 1.5 years, other people have come in, and now there's a new social structure where the spirit room, when you go to the spirit room at night, Moses might be there playing his guitar, and half the people in there are now younger people. Well, they know me. I know Terry Watt. Well, one night I go home and David Varela, I'm at home and David Varela is invading our house. And we have a telephone. Our house is being invaded by a drunk. I call the spirit room for some reason to get a hold of the local cop, And Terry Watt comes down to my house with a stick. And he gets David Varela out. There is no cop. We don't have a cop. So the community at that time was evolving and emerging. We were merging. Terry Watt was an ex-Marine. He didn't like hippies, but we were in his bar all the time, and he saw that we were having kids and we were human beings. And when one of us had a problem, he came down to my house and got the guy out of my house. And so the social structure of Jerome just continued to evolve, and it was very vibrant. It contained, it just, there were more and more of us, and we were the bar, and we were the English kitchen. And when you went into the what's now the Miners' Druce in the morning, all the Jerome people were in there having coffee, to a point where you had to watch out. If somebody was in the booth in back of you, you couldn't really talk bad about certain people, because it was a very cohesive network at that time. And it was basically, it didn't matter at that point whether you smoked pot or not. If you were below the age of 50 or 60, you were just part of the town of Jerome. It didn't, the social structure didn't depend on taking drugs. Most of it consisted of who drank beer.
Well, Ed, my card is full on that camera.
There you go.
And I'm getting tired.
Yeah, and I need to get back and finish Tommy's guitar.
Well, man, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, and what I can do is, if I can write down like a number of things that occur to me if you want to have another session at some point.
Yeah, that would be fine. We'll go along. I'll have to. I'm going to stop this recording now.